Okay, I like the script, but why are we talking about a book that isn't coming out for another 10 years?
Why don't you just shut up?
Sule! The Voidlight archive is still far away, but luckily we know more about it than you might think. And yes, Brandon himself thinks of the final 5 Stormlight books as the Voidlight archive, in case you were typing up one of those actually comments. One of the biggest details Brandon has shared is the 5 flashback characters of these stories. If you don't want to know who those 5 are, or you aren't caught up through Wind and Truth, now is your time to click off the video. Otherwise, I want to go through each of these characters and talk about what we might see from them in their future flashbacks. Sule, we're trying to reach 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and the end of the year is almost here, so please hit subscribe. Lift might just be the most controversial character in the Stormlight archive. Love her or hate her, she will likely be our first flashback character in the Voidlight archive, and I for one am looking forward to it. And yes, I am also one of the ones who are not the biggest fan of Lift. Chapter 33 of Wind and Truth shows us a little flashback of Lift's history, musing on how normal her life was. What if she'd stayed there, in Raleigh Lorum, instead of wherever the wind put her? Now hold your horses, theorists. That's a lowercase w for wind, so I don't believe she's referencing the ancient Sprend wind. I do think this shows us the first detail of what we might get in Lift's flashbacks, leaving Raleigh Lorum. This city is the capital of Erie, and we learn a lot more about it in the Stonewalkers RPG campaign. We actually covered that whole story in this video here, and you should watch it. We don't know exactly where Lift was born, but she moved to Raleigh Lorum with her family sometime when she was young. She then lived on the streets for a while before something caused her to leave, and I can only imagine we will see that happen. Another major event in Lift's life that we should see get touched on is the death of her mother. We know that Lift was close with her mother, but we still don't know exactly what caused her to die. This is presumably the main reason she left Raleigh Lorum, but again, we just don't know much about this. This sequence will likely be a large portion of her flashbacks, and could also be what leads to the biggest question we want answered. What was her deal with cultivation? Lift went to the valley, but she didn't meet the Night Watcher. Rather, she saw cultivation herself. She requested not to change, because she believes that her mother is still alive and wants her to be recognizable in case they meet again. Dang it, Brandon, you're gonna make another book that makes me cry, aren't you? Sadly, we don't actually know what cultivation did to her, but we have certainly seen some wacky results. Among other things, Lift can enter the Stormfather's visions, physically touch Spren, and oh yeah, she absorbs lifelight through food. Wendell believes that Lift partially exists in the cognitive realm, which does give a starting point for an explanation for how she can do all these things, but there are certainly still many other questions that need to be answered. The details of her boon and curse are still a mystery, if she even has a boon and curse to begin with. Cultivation can do as she likes after all. It could be that cultivation gifted her Wendell. The organization the Spren was a part of, called The Ring, decided Wendell should bond with her due to cultivation's gift. Then maybe the curse was simply that her bond could only use lifelight, but that still isn't completely confirmed, and honestly it hardly seems to fit with her request anyway. Something big happened here, and we hope it will be answered in book 6. It's gotta be. The next flashback in the Voidlight archive will feature none other than Renarin Kholin. I assume much of the earlier parts of his flashbacks will involve time with his mother Evie and young Adolin while the Blackthorn was out on his conquests. We might get to see how Evie dealt with Renarin's blood sickness and how Adolin dealt with his different younger brother. Obviously later in life, Renarin developed a close relationship with Adolin and Dalinar, but it would be interesting to see the unique struggles when he was a child. All of that will be touching, and we might get some major reveals, but there's one thing that we really hope Book 7 addresses: Gliss. As far as we know, Gliss and Renarin have been bonded for most of the Stormlight archive. Renarin's visions start in Words of Radiance, but they could have met well before that, thanks to this Words of Brandon. Throughout a majority of the first 5 books, Renarin is struggling to understand these unique visions that Gliss provides. Remember, Gliss is an enlightened mist Spren, and their bond is the first of its kind. Obviously, the unmade Ja'anat would go on to corrupt more Spren, but Renarin was pretty unique for a time. Why was Renarin the first? Did Gliss choose this, or did Ja'anat? There really isn't much more to ask about Renarin, which also means that there could be flashbacks we aren't expecting. I guess we'll just have to see when Book 7 drops in a decade. The rest of the release order has been intentionally left up in the air by Brandon to leave him some wiggle room with the certain arcs and story beats. But his proposed list has Shalash being slotted into Book 8 as a Dustbringer? Well, nothing is confirmed about that, but it's pretty clear that something is wrong with the patron herald of the Lightweavers. You see, the 10 books of the Stormlight/Voidlight archive each represent one of the 10 orders of radiance through the flashback POV characters. Book 1 was Kaladin for Windrunners, Book 2 was Shallan for Lightweavers, Book 3 was Dalinar for Bondsmiths, Book 4 was Venli for Willshapers, and Book 5 was Zeth for Skybreakers. We can then presume that Lift will be for Edge Dancers and Renarin for Truth Watchers. The final two pretty clearly cover Stonewards and Elsecallers, so this means that the only character left is Shalash, and the only order left is Dustbringers. Yeah, you can think about that one. Take your time. Anyways, that doesn't change much of what we hope to see from the Herald's POV. Ash grew up as the daughter of Jezrien, a king of Alashwa. I honestly think her flashbacks will have a lot to do with that time, being our window into what the planet was like before it was destroyed. I also think that we're gonna get to see what the devastating effects of Unbound surge binding on the planet was, and what the wars against surrounding city-states were like. The main thing I'm personally interested in is getting to see the nature of that aforementioned surge binding on Alashwa. We know that Odium granted surge binding to those who would fight for his growing empire. What motivations did these people have? How closely did they serve the god of hatred? Most importantly, what was Emperor Zoril the Voidbringer like? And what led to his downfall before Jezrien took his place? I'm calling it now. Zoril the Voidbringer was the coolest dude ever. I mean, he's known as the freaking Voidbringer. Sorry, this section's about Ash. During the Era of Solitude, we've seen her destroying depictions of herself all across Roshar. We might actually get a bit of background on what her magic herald ailment was doing to her and how it affected her mental state. We also might see her destroy a lot of art. This woman has been alive for thousands of years, so Brandon will certainly have plenty of moments to choose from. I personally hope that we get a lot of characterization for her and that she isn't simply used as a vessel for showing us history. This does seem to be the trickiest backstory to handle, but I trust Brandon. Okay, now following the projected order, Taln would be number 4, and I don't think I can wait that long. Taln is the freaking coolest. On the surface, you might think Shalash and Taln would have similar flashbacks, but you'd be wrong. Taln was never on Alashwa, most likely. He even referred to the planet as his grandmother's planet, so he would have been at least a full generation removed. Otherwise, he would have called it his parents' planet, right? He was a Rosharan native who was a soldier at one point, around the time of the First Desolation. I think we might see what life was like for the humans back then through his earlier flashbacks. We should get to see the growing tensions between humans and singers that inevitably boils over into war. At some point, we know Taln has a serious moment in his history that needs to be touched on. The time he tried to kill a god. Yes, in Wind and Truth chapter 65, we learned that Taln attempted to kill Cultivation, and he was given the weapon to do it by Kalak. This confrontation with Cultivation connected Taln to the gods in a way that allowed for him to become a herald. I definitely think that flashbacks will spend some time on this, especially if that weapon is what we theorize it was. A Dawn Shard. We have a whole video about that here. The final thing I hope we get to see is the 4,500 year period that Taln single-handedly held back the gates of hell. Yes, Taln was tortured on Braze for longer than the time between the First Desolation and when the Heralds abandoned him. And he still never broke. What could possibly have been going through his mind for those millennia? Also, Taln's flashbacks could really be anything from the countless desolations, and we very well could see him bringing down thunderclasts and hordes of the fused. But I hope we get to learn more about the man who tries to kill a god and bore the weight of humanity for thousands of years. Maybe that's just me. The final POV character is none other than Queen Yasna. Now you might think we know a lot about Yasna's character already. However, there is something from her past that has been hinted at in the novels but never fully explored: her traumatic childhood. From Oathbringer chapter 47, Yasna settled back, listening to the 3 Spanreeds scratching paper, writing out notes that she feared would mostly be irrelevant. Something stirred deep within her. Glimmers of a memory from a dark room, screaming her voice ragged. A childhood illness nobody else seemed to remember, for all it had done to her. Yeah, so Yasna didn't have a great time in her youth, and I have a guess as to who is to blame: her father. We know from the prologue of Wind and Truth that Gavilar had close dealings with Thydakar. If you're familiar with the Mistborn series, then you're aware of the process of snapping. There's a popular theory that this is what Gavilar tried with Yasna. Knowing Gavilar's unhinged desperation for power in Wind and Truth, it's not a far stretch to think he may have tried to awaken a hidden power that she never could have harnessed. This is all speculation, but Regardless, I think it's more than likely that this part of Yasna's life will be the main point of her flashbacks, and Brandon has actually confirmed it somewhat from an interview with the Shardcast.
Is there any specific thing in that book that you would change if you had had a little more time?
I might have brought out a little bit more of Yasna's trauma in her sequence. I just don't want to get into that too much because I need it for the back five. And once again, if I do too much early on, then it ruins story arcs for later on. And so I've been, you can tell, very delicate with talking about Yasna's trauma and who she is and her flashback sequence.
So yeah, this is certainly going to be a big point of her character arc in the flashbacks. We also might get to see her deconstructing her faith in the Voran Church, assuming there was any faith to begin with, and we might see some of the early consequences of becoming an influential heretic. The final bit I would like to see from Book 10 is a little bit more of Yasna's time in Shadesmar. There is of course her encounter with Ivory in the Words of Radiance prologue, but what about the time she spent learning her powers? Yasna has some level of understanding of Shadesmar by the time she meets Shallan, so I hope we get to see her early experiences with the cognitive realm. But what do you think? Are you excited for the Voidlight Archive? Whose flashbacks are you most looking forward to? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And I want to give a quick shout out to our true Lightcaller patrons, Mac, Aquila, Cobweb, and Stephanie. Thank you so much for all of your support. Kolo?